Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about XENNS T Pro. So this, of course, is the follow-on to the original T, which I never heard. So sorry, I can't answer the question as to, how much better is this one over the original, or how it changed from the original. They do have some marketing words on that, and we'll talk about that in a minute or two. But yeah, I think the original was a very well-known set. It was a very well-liked set, and I don't think this really changes that formula. I think it's going to be a very, very likable set for people who are familiar with XENNS house sound. It is right there and executed just as well as their other sets. So yeah, I sort of have no doubt that people who like the original will like the Pro as well. But this is what it looks like up close. It's a very nice build, just says T Pro, black metal bottom, kind of nice vent, 2-pin, nice faceplate, a little sparkle on it. I think all that is done quite well. Cable, modular cable, case in sky blue is kind of different and interesting looking. But yeah, I think the bulk of what is interesting about this set is not the accessories, and it's not even the graph. And I'll kind of briefly talk about the graph, and I will say that the graph looks very nice. It's sort of a shallow U-shape, V-shape. You can kind of see they went kind of just slightly below the Harman target there, slightly below the Harman target here. This little bit that pokes above the Harman target isn't really there. That was the 8K. It should pretty much follow this line. But you can call that relaxed. You can call that, a shallower V-shape, U-shape. But what's sort of the important part about this graph isn't so much the graph itself, but how this graph and this tuning aligns to the drivers that they chose and their tuning skills and how they execute it. And all those things work together to be bigger than the parts. So I don't want to kind of drill down too much into the graph and just say the graph is very nice looking. But what the real important bit is what they did with the tuning and matching the drivers and the drivers that they use and all of that. I think actually that part is the more important story here, as opposed to looking at simply at the graph. So what is it? It is a 2+6 hybrid with dual 8mm biocomposite dynamic driver. So I think that's the main bit that changed from the original, right? This one is now a dual dynamic driver, and you do get nulls for the balanced armatures. So on the marketing bit, they do talk about some things that they change, and I will say that they called it sub-bass impact has been enhanced. Fundamental bass frequencies have been retuned to provide better emphasis for guitar notes, as well as body and presence to vocals and instruments. And I'll say yes, all of that is super important. For those of you who have followed my reviews and heard my after shows, I've harped on this exact point for most of 2024. Lots and lots of brands have sort of adopted this predominant bass shelf, which is very sub-bass heavy. And for those of you who like sub-bass music with sub-bass, it is a very dominant part of the music, and it tends to be overdone on most of these sets. It tends to make very pretty graphs, but as far as a very nice balance between sub-bass and mid-bass, it is sort of way off base. And it's sort of a double positive for these brands. The marketing guys get this graph that looks great. You have a 10 dB bass shelf. People look at it and say, that is a huge amount of bass, really nice extension. You get some impressions of it of people who don't really listen to sub-bass music, and they say, this sounds wonderful. But for those of you who listen to these style of sets with these huge bass shelves and have music with sub-bass in it, you sort of notice that the sub-bass tends to be a little bit too bloated, too boomy. It's too much. And we've kind of been through this cycle in 2024, so it was really kind of refreshing to see XENNS sort of call out that style of bass shelf and say, this is what we did, and this is really about doing a better ratio of sub-bass to mid-bass and improving all these little bits that all these other sets from 2024 have actually gotten quite wrong. So second bit, another thing that I've talked about is more enunciation at the core. Pinna frequency, shallower decay, curvature, brings out the micro details while sounding pleasant. So yes, this one still is relaxed and it does need some volume, but I would agree that enunciation is very super important. And I talked about this with the S12 2024 version. Planar sets are very, very good at vocal, I call it articulation, they call it enunciation, but the clarity, the presenting very, very clear vocals, sharp, clear vocals, is something that not every set has been successful at. It's sort of very difficult to do that with a very sub bass heavy tuning like some of the recent sets have done. So again, this is one of these small points that a lot of sets have gotten wrong recently, and again, they're addressing it in almost two ways. One, they do it through proper, they call it proper pinna, proper core pinna frequencies. So that is sort of right here. So this is a no shout pinna area, and this is perfect, right? You bring just enough energy so it sounds very clear, and you kind of cut across so there's enough clarity to your vocals. But the second bit to do that, I would say, is right behind the vocals, behind the mids. You don't have this predominance of sub bass like you do on these other sets, and that tends to cloud the mids. It veils the mids. It tends to not allow as much clarity as you should in the mids. And again, that's where that style of bass shelf on all these other sets has really gotten wrong. And again, I'll say that from a marketing perspective, it looks amazing because you have this big 10 dB thing out here. But if you actually listen to music that has instruments out here and sub bass in those, you hear it all over. It's sort of this predominance droning of sub bass that clouds the mids, and it really prevents you from getting to actual clear mids. And that's, again, one of the things I talked about on S12 2024. What planar drivers do very well is that particular thing, because they have a bass which doesn't persist through the mids, and you have super technical planar driver, which is very good. So same thing on this set. You basically have 6 balanced armatures. That is your technical edge, that is your note definition, that is the sharpness to your vocals, and then you have a very clear background, and that gives you enough contrast and depth and all the other things and dimension that are going to make your mid sound beautiful and clean and give you more enunciation and articulation, as we talked about. So yes, I do think the 2 marketing points that they picked out were actually very, very important, and not only in addressing what they changed in from T to T Pro, but in generally, the points they are addressing are things that I have talked about quite a bit, and 100% agree that those are important things and what's going to set T Pro apart from lots of other sets, and we'll kind of talk about those. So this set was going to be compared to Da Vinci and Hype and Estrella and Dynaquattro and pretty much every other recent hybrid but none of those sets really sound like XENNS house sound, and they don't have the tuning skills that XENNS has. And I'll say that this relaxed version of this tuning is sort of a XENNS natural house sound style, and I kind of love this style. I think Top had a very similar style, but Top is actually even a little bit more V-shaped. But getting into this warm, natural sound, but enough resolve, is something that they do very, very well. And they are extremely good at doing and executing at their house sound. So I will say none of the other sets, I think Da Vinci and Dynaquattro, way too bass heavy, too bass centric. Hype went for the balance. Estrella went for kind of more bass and more treble. So I will say you can compare it to all of those, but those all have different sound signatures that don't really match up to what XENNS does. This one definitely sounds, leans kind of warm and smooth for full and relaxed, and you expect it to be less resolving, less extended, less impactful, intimate and stage, but XENNS has an amazing ear for balancing a smooth sound and resolve, and that's exactly what they did on T Pro. Detail Kings, you guys who like tons of detail, you probably won't be satisfied, as they really went for the pleasant sound as the priority. And again, it's a lot of this. It was bringing out the micro details and the details, but sounding pleasant. And they tend to emphasize the sounding pleasant more than bringing out the details. So this one doesn't sound forced in any way. So you guys who are really into Detail Kings, that this one is probably not going to be used. For people who are really into a warm, smooth sound, but doesn't really lose a lot of the detail that they put into it and the resolve that they put into it. So where most of the mentioned sets kind of went astray, and I talked about this, was level control and tuning, and tuning that complemented drivers, especially the bass, right? There was sets that did too much sub bass, not enough mid bass, too much of both. Too much sub bass is really the enemy of this vocal enunciation. That's why I just talked about it for 5 minutes. Very, very important to get sub bass control so it's not so clouding the mids, so dominant over the mids. And a lot of these sets really got that wrong, and they tend to compensate in various ways. Right? I just said the Stray did more bass, more treble. Da Vinci, had a really complex crossover networks trying to bring clarity to the mids and dropping them down earlier into a more U-shaped tuning. Some of them, DaVinci did this as well. You bump up the 15K, Australia bumped up the 5K. Lots and lots of different compensation versions of trying to get more detail into the mids by having, trying to overcome as much bass as they put into it. So when you bring these both, when you bring both bass and treble back down into more relaxed levels, the way T Pro did it, you don't have to do these crazy compensations, and you end up revealing the mids as opposed to trying to force them in front. And that's exactly what T Pro. So I'll say that all of these sets did some form of compensation, but not quite the same as level control that you're going to get in T Pro. And for those of you who enjoy high volume listening, there's really no need to look at the others. This is the only one that does volume scaling. It's the only one that maintains proper balance with more volume. It is an amazingly volume scaling beast at what it does. And again, you can kind of see what they did, just by bringing these levels down a little bit and then having them, not so much peaky. You don't get any treble. As you increase the volume, these aren't going kind of linearly with volume. They are kind of moving a little bit slower than volume. So you can turn this one up and up and up, and you aren't getting the peakiness and the treble that you're going to get on other sets, or such a dominant sub bass 10 dB. That becomes such a dominant focus of your music that you lose everything else. And again, they kind of pick these levels right, and the way they interact with the volume and scale up, very, very nice. So very well done on the volume scaling. The guy who tuned this obviously likes to listen to it at a little bit higher volume. So on the bass, the first thing I noticed right away, and I talked about this, is the sub bass level inventing is really spot on. You can throw Beastie Boys on it. Go pick up License to Ill if you've never heard that. Metallica, I tend to focus on Kill 'Em All. If you haven't heard Whiplash, definitely check out that track. And Justice for All, One. These are tracks that I kind of went over and over on this set because it really plays them very, very well. And a lot of it had to do with the bass shelf and the control that they put into the sub bass. Lots of these other sets just had that boominess and bloatiness to them. To hear this really executed with really nice level control and venting, very, very nice. So doesn't sound uncontrolled at all. And second, the mid-bass presence for the body and the lower mids and the impact. Everything they talked about in the marketing, you kind of hear right there in the mid-bass as well. It's just really another example where the 8mm works well in conveying proper control that you're expecting at $360 while not hollowing out the lower mids like tends to be popular these days, and doing the mid-bass tuck and dropping this little bit down to the floor at 200 hertz, and that tends to give you big flat bottom mids, but it tends to hollow out your mids at the same time. So that's why they have a 10 dB sub bass and a kind of a 0 dB mid bass, and then you end up with a leaner, brighter sound to it for Harman. And again, these are things that Mangird T Pro does not do, and their tuning is actually kind of on the warmer, fuller side, and a lot of that has to do with the bass shelf they picked, and just a really well-tuned 2 dynamic driver pushed right to the edge of its capability. And again, I talk about the 10 dB bass shelf quite a bit, and a lot of sets tend to push it right up to 70 for 10 dB because they think that looks great in the marketing graphs, and it makes a very pretty symmetrical graph if you have 10 dB here and 10 dB here, beautiful U-shape. But there's not that many drivers that can really do 10 dB of sub bass with music that has sub bass and it sounds controlled or not boomy or not bloated. So again, I will say that is more of a marketing thing as opposed to a top of the line style tuning that actually sounds good, that has been a very predominant feature that we've seen in lots and lots of sets in 2024. So on the treble on T Pro, where the bass level, I think I would say it's pushed to DD's capability. Keep it just under 10 dB. It's like 7 or 8 dB, and that's exactly where this dynamic driver sounds really nice and sounds super controlled. The treble is about sounding pleasant, so there's no peaks, there's no sibilance, and it really takes advantage of the bass control, and that helps with the mid clarity like we talked about in enunciation and articulation. You have a lot of clarity because you don't have all the sub bass behind the mids, and you add just enough treble and there's even more clarity. Lots of volume scaling is possible, and I would call the level conservative or relaxed, right? This one, as I said, if you look at it on the graph, it actually cuts across about right here. So it's probably a little bit lower than what your typical set in 2024 looks like as far as treble levels, but if you are a treble head, if you are a detail king, if you're an over resolver and you like to hear tons and tons of resolve, go check out Estrella. That was sort of the more and more version. It's a very engaging, kind of very much a lot of treble style set for those of you who are into that. That's not what T Pro is. If you want to listen to Motley Crue, and again, much like Metallica, I like older Motley Crue. Shout out to Devil. If you like newer music, do check out DJ Spinall. He has a song called One Call. And again, this sort of bassy music, lots of vocals, lots of kind of treble, all of that plays right into what T Pro is very good at. So that song sounds really, really good on this song. It sounds big and open. The vocal clarity, the bass level, how it's so controlled but still full. All those things kind of come through. And again, Motley Crue, it's a little bit different style of music, but T Pro can handle lots and lots of everything in between because it actually has really, really nice tuning. So yeah, I think this is, but if you want to listen to those at higher volume, that is definitely where T Pro sounds glorious. It is a very much a high volume set. And the mids, again, this one is the recipe for success. So everything I just talked about up until this point sort of builds up to the point of very, very nice mids. The bass control, the dark background, the more contrast in the mids, so you can hear the black dark background through the mids and the vocals, more separation, more depth, lowered pinna for no shout, natural treble extension, nice balanced armatures to give you the technicals, but not the BA timbre because of the treble tuning is a little more conservative. Again, XENNS has a very, very good ear for balancing and pushing the balanced armatures enough to sound like a 2+6 hybrid, but not step out of a very natural house sound. And this is not an analytical, edgy sounding hybrid. It's kind of a lot different than some of the other sets that have come out in 2024. This one is sort of more in line. If you've heard anything from XENNS, I think it's more in line with that. And the stage, again, more so than the other parts, the bass and the conservative treble level will sound better and stage better at higher volume. As I said, the dynamic driver tuning is spot on. The lower back of the head bass position, those of you who kind of have heard more expensive sets, you get really tuned into where the bass position is and where the drums are kind of banging. Are they banging in the middle of your head? Are they in the back of your head? This one is sort of lowered and kind of at jaw level, and that just leaves you a really big open space for the mids. And again, why does the enunciation and articulation, why do the vocals sound so good? Why do the mids sound so good on this? A lot of that was just moving the bass a little bit lower in stage and out of the way, so everything is super clear in the middle. And again, just one of these things that most sets in 2024 hasn't got wrong. But yeah, this one is really, really nice in stage, and especially if you have an amplifier which does really nice kind of more 3D immersive style stage, this one will sort of play right into that as well. So is it better than Top? And like I said, I haven't heard T Pro, or I haven't heard T, but I did hear Top, and I'll say there's no fear of missing out on Top with this one. I think it's close enough. And like I said, Top is a little bit more V-shaped, and it's slightly different, but would I spend the extra money for Top? I would say no. I would just stick with this one. It is a great set. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.